The untold saga of the Buffalo Soldiers in the American West. The fury on the plains and the badge of honor. The sky over the Great Plains did not merely hold the sun, it held a furnace, a merciless, blinding glare that turned the dust into a fine, choking powder, and the silence into a heavy, suffocating pressure. It was a silence broken only by the rasping breath of men and horses, and the ominous thud, thud, thud of distant hooves. The American West of the late 1860s was an untamed, treacherous, and profoundly unfinished territory. Its story was being written in blood, sweat, and endless miles of unforgiving terrain. And yet, amid this brutal canvas of expansion, a remarkable and historically pivotal force emerged. They were men bound by a complex, almost unbelievable paradox. African American soldiers, scarcely 2 years removed from the shackles of slavery, now sworn to the very government that denied their humanity. They were entrusted with the task of conquering a wild frontier for a society that despised their color. These were the men of the 9th and 10th U.S. Cavalry and the 24th and 25th U.S. Infantry regiments. Black veterans of the Civil War, united by a blue uniform and a dangerous ambition, to prove their full manhood and citizenship with the utmost courage. They faced every imaginable enemy, but their most formidable adversaries were the indigenous tribes of the plains, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, the Kiowa, and the Apache. And it was from these very adversaries that the African American cavalrymen received their name. In the dust and fury of skirmishes on the high plains, the Cheyenne warriors encountered a new kind of soldier. Their faces were dark, their hair tight and woolly like the sacred buffalo, and their fighting spirit was relentless and unstoppable, like a stampeding herd. They fought with a stubborn refusal to break that mirrored the Great Plains' most revered animal. The name, spoken with respect, became history. Buffalo Soldiers. It was a compliment, a recognition of their peerless bravery and undeniable might, a dignity bestowed by the enemy when their own countrymen denied them basic rights. This is the untold, factual, and astonishing account of the men who tamed the Wild West, not for glory, but for dignity. The legendary Buffalo Soldiers. The promise of 1866 and the reckoning. The year 1866 smelled of gunpowder and freshly turned earth. The Union was a fractured, bleeding entity struggling to stitch itself back together. In July, Congress passed the Army Reorganization Act, containing a radical clause, the creation of 6 all-black regiments in the regular peacetime Army. This was a seismic shift. For the first time, black men were commissioned as professional soldiers in the standing army. For men like Sergeant Major Emanuel Stance, a former enslaved man, the uniform was more than cloth. It was a defiant declaration. Military service offered stability, literacy, a profession, and critically, a dignity largely unavailable in civilian life. The Buffalo Soldiers possessed the lowest desertion rates and lowest court-martial rates in the entire U.S. Army, a testament to their iron discipline and the value they placed on their service. They knew they were on trial, not just for their lives, but for the honor of their entire race. The 9th U.S. Cavalry was organized at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The air was thick with skepticism and outright hostility. But inside the barracks, the training was rigorous and relentless. The horses assigned to the black regiments were often inferior mounts, but the Buffalo Soldiers, through exceptional care, consistently boasted lower rates of equine death than their white counterparts. Their bond with their mounts became a point of pride. The 9th and 10th Cavalry regiments were deployed to the most desolate, dangerous regions: Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Their duties were vast, vital, and nearly impossible: protecting the border, constructing forts, building hundreds of miles of telegraph lines, and escorting the U.S. mail. It was in Texas, in the unforgiving glare of the desert sun, that Sergeant Emanuel Stance wrote his name into history. In the spring of 1870, near Fort McCavitt, a Kiowa raiding party had stolen a herd of cavalry horses. Stance, with a small detachment of just 10 men, was sent in pursuit. The odds were heavily stacked against them. Stance led his troops with calculated ferocity. Over the course of a single brutal week, his small unit engaged the raiders 3 separate times. He led a surprise attack, recovered the stolen horses, and secured government mules. For his distinguished and conspicuous gallantry in action, Sergeant Emanuel Stance was awarded the Medal of Honor. He was the first African-American soldier to receive the Medal of Honor in the post-Civil War era. It was proof, carved out of the raw earth of Texas, that the Buffalo Soldiers were not just equal, but often superior soldiers of the Republic. The fire in Arizona and the shadow of Victorio. The campaigns in the Southwest, Arizona and New Mexico, pitted the Buffalo Soldiers against the most tenacious and skilled warriors on the continent, the Apache. The landscape was a broken, beautiful maze of mountains and canyons, impossible to track a determined foe. The defining campaign was Victorio's War, from 1979 to 1881. Victorio, an Apache chief, was a brilliant tactician who knew the vast desert terrain better than any surveyor. To chase Victorio, the U.S. Army threw everything it had, but it was the seasoned troopers of the 10th U.S. Cavalry who bore the brunt of the pursuit. Imagine the life of a trooper like Clinton Greaves. His existence was reduced to the brutal simplicity of tracking. Days bled into weeks, chasing phantoms through the unforgiving Guadalupe and Black Mountains. They marched through canyons so narrow that they had to lead their horses single file, rationing water to mere sips. Their dark skin, an object of derision in town, was a distinct advantage in the field, making them harder to spot in the shadows of the high desert. They were masters of the very land that sought to kill them. In January 1879, Greaves, while commanding a scouting detachment, was ambushed by a much larger force of Apache warriors. Instead of retreating, Greaves ordered his men to take a defensive position. He then, with incredible coolness under fire, single-handedly covered the retreat of his men, repeatedly exposing himself to return cover fire. His Medal of Honor citation lauded his gallantry and driving off the Indians. The war finally came to a head in the summer of 1880. Victorio, constantly harassed and short on supplies, was cornered. The 10th Cavalry played a critical role in the final, relentless pursuit. They had crisscrossed thousands of miles, relentlessly pushing the Apache, proving themselves to be perhaps the most effective fighting units on the frontier. The cost was staggering, but the discipline held. The legend of the Buffalo Soldiers was no longer an anecdote. It was an established, astonishing fact of American military history. Beyond the battlefield, the builders of the West. The true saga of the Buffalo Soldiers extends far beyond the clang of battle. They were, in the broadest sense, nation builders, the crucial, unacknowledged labor force that made the settlement of the West possible. Their rifles protected, their hands constructed. The 24th and 25th Infantry regiments were the ground troops, the tireless engineers of the frontier. They led exploratory expeditions, charting water sources and routes through previously unmapped territories. They erected the essential network of forts, and they managed complex supply lines. At places like Fort Concho, Texas, their service was monotonous, grueling, and dangerous. They spent weeks at a time
stringing telegraph wire across desolate landscapes, fully aware that a lone sniper could cut them off entirely. They built roads from nothing but packed earth and crushed rock. One of the most remarkable instances of their non-combat bravery was their tireless work as escorts for mail carriers. The mail was the lifeblood of the frontier. Small squads of Buffalo Soldiers would ride with the coaches through every kind of peril, from flash floods to organized bandit attacks. Their near-perfect record of ensuring the U.S. mail got through is a quiet yet profound testament to their dedication. Yet, throughout all this service, the most relentless enemy was the pervasive, virulent racism of the time. In nearly every frontier town they passed through, they were met with hostility. They were denied service, refused lodging, and often subjected to violent verbal abuse. In some instances, like the gunfight in San Angelo, Texas, this hostility exploded into violence. But the soldiers showed remarkable restraint, abiding by the military code of honor that was so often denied to them by the civilian population. Their self-control in the face of blinding prejudice is arguably one of their greatest, most unsung victories. Their discipline was not just military, it was a civil rights statement. The pathfinders of the parks. As the Indian Wars officially drew to a close, the Army's role shifted, but the necessity of the Buffalo Soldiers did not diminish. It shifted focus to a new, spectacular American treasure, the national parks. This is the most surprising chapter of their saga. Between 1891 and 1913, the U.S. Army was the official administrator of Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks in California. In the early 1900s, it was the men of the 9th Cavalry and the 24th Infantry, the Buffalo Soldiers, who became the first official park rangers of the American system. Their task was to manage and protect these natural cathedrals, patrolling to stop illegal grazing and poaching, and fighting wildfires. Captain Charles Young is a monumental figure in this history. The third black graduate of West Point, Young became the acting superintendent of Sequoia National Park in 1903. He was the first African American to hold this position. Young and his troops completed more essential infrastructure projects in a single summer than their predecessors had in the previous 3 years combined. They built the road to the giant forest, making the park accessible to the American public for the first time. Long before Smokey Bear, the Buffalo Soldiers were the primary force fighting wildfires. Their devotion to conservation, protecting ancient sequoias, building trails, and preserving the land for all future generations is a powerful counter-narrative. They were guardians, pathfinders, and the original stewards of the nation's most precious lands. The Splendid Little War and San Juan Hill. The year 1898 pulled the Buffalo Soldiers from the quiet service of the parks into the international arena, the Spanish-American War.
In the steamy, dense jungle of Cuba, they would fight their most famous battle. The pivotal moment came on July 1, 1898, during the assault on the Spanish positions overlooking Santiago, Kettle Hill, and San Juan Hill. The story is often told as the triumph of Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders, but the historical record makes a crucial correction. The Buffalo Soldiers were there first, and they fought with unparalleled courage. The soldiers of the 10th Cavalry were the first to come under heavy fire. When the Rough Riders were pinned down, it was the men of the 10th Cavalry, dismounted and attacking on foot, who led the charge up Kettle Hill. Teddy Roosevelt himself later wrote that had it not been for the Buffalo Soldiers, the outcome of the battle might have been different. He noted their coolness and courage. The 24th Infantry, meanwhile, was engaged in the equally bloody Battle of El Caney, successfully overwhelming the Spanish defenders. The Buffalo Soldiers emerged from Cuba with an astonishing record of valor. 5 Buffalo Soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor for their heroism during the war. Their actions served as the most public, undeniable proof of their loyalty. Yet, as the soldiers returned home, the recognition faded, and the cruel realities of segregation reasserted themselves. The victory in Cuba did not translate into equality at home. The long shadow of John Pershing and the Mexican border. As the 20th century dawned, the Buffalo Soldiers were chasing a phantom across the deserts of the U.S.-Mexican border. Their commander was a man whose career would forever be linked with them, General John Pershing. Pershing earned his famed nickname, Blackjack, commanding the 10th U.S. Cavalry. While some used it as a slur, the soldiers of the 10th used it as a term of respect for a man who demanded excellence regardless of color. In 1916, the 9th and 10th Cavalry were deployed for the punitive expedition into Mexico, tasked with neutralizing the revolutionary Pancho Villa. This was a relentless, grinding test of endurance. The Buffalo Soldiers chased Villa's highly mobile guerrillas through the vast arid desert. They were testing the limits of cavalry warfare against a swift, modern guerrilla force. A major clash occurred at the Battle of Carrizal in June 1916. Though outnumbered and outgunned by Spanish federal forces, the Buffalo Soldiers fought fiercely. Their disciplined defense prevented a disaster that could have plunged the U.S. into a full-scale war. The Mexican expedition also placed the Buffalo Soldiers as the advance guard for a mechanized army, working alongside the U.S. Army's 1st Automobile Truck Companies and 1st Air Reconnaissance Squadrons. They adapted from the saddle to the emerging motor age, demonstrating their enduring resourcefulness. Yet, despite their valor, they still faced segregation in the small border towns, and their sacrifices were often minimized in the press. They brought order to a chaotic border, but they could not bring racial equality to the nation they served. The scars of World War I and the Great Migration. When the U.S. entered World War I, African Americans rushed to enlist, seeing a chance to fight for democracy abroad and earn it at home. But the war exposed the nation's hypocrisy. The original regiments were largely kept from combat in Europe. A dark and painful chapter was the Houston riot of 1917. The 24th Infantry Regiment, stationed in a deeply segregated city, was subjected to months of unbearable harassment. When racial provocation exploded into tragedy, 19 soldiers of the 24th Infantry were summarily hanged, the largest single execution of American soldiers by the Army. This devastating event served as a stark reminder. The black soldier's life, even in uniform, remained cheap, and self-defense against racial violence was considered treason. But the soldiers showed remarkable restraint, abiding by the military code of honor that was so often denied to them by the civilian population. Their self-control in the face of blinding prejudice is arguably one of their greatest, most unsung victories. Their discipline was not just military, it was a civil rights statement. Integration and the end of a regiment. In World War II, the Buffalo Soldiers were again called to service, still segregated, still often handed inferior equipment. The 92nd Division saw heavy combat in the Italian campaign. Lieutenant Vernon Baker, who served in the 92nd, single-handedly destroyed 3 enemy machine gun nests. Denied the Medal of Honor at the time due to racial bias, his astounding courage was finally recognized in 1997. The culmination of the Buffalo Soldiers' century-long struggle for recognition came not on a battlefield, but in an executive order. In 1948, President Harry T. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially ordering the desegregation of the United States Armed Forces. It was a profound validation of every trooper who had worn the uniform since 1866. The last segregated black unit, the 24th Infantry Regiment, was officially deactivated in 1951 during the Korean War. Its soldiers dispersed into newly integrated units. The historic 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiments ceased to be
all-black entities. The very last Buffalo soldier, Mark Matthews, who enlisted in the 10th Cavalry in 1901, died in 2005 at the age of 111. When he was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, the nation acknowledged the passing of a living link to one of its most courageous eras. The saga of the Buffalo Soldiers is the story of America itself. Imperfect, often hypocritical, but ultimately a journey toward a more perfect union. They did not just earn their place in American history. They carved it out with their bare hands, their rifles, and their unwavering discipline in the face of all enemies. Given a name by their enemies, they proudly transformed it into a timeless badge of honor. Their untold saga is the bedrock of the modern U.S. military and a powerful, enduring symbol of Black excellence and American grit.